The Economist magazine said that sharp increases in inflation over the past year has blindsided many economists and no one saw it coming. Well, today's guest did see it coming, has been talking about it for many years, and it's conversations that we've had. What did she see coming and what is happening right now? Most importantly, what are we expecting next? Inflation, deflation, stagflation, what's going on with the Fed? What's going on with the IMF and their new secret currency? She's going to break that down for us. How does all of this unfold, and what should we be doing to protect not just our money, but our life? We're going to get into that as well. Always great conversations. I'm having Lynette Zang back for the second time. She's the chief market analyst at ITM Trading. Always a great conversation, always so full of information. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Hey, Lynette, thanks so much for joining me today.
I'm so glad to be here, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we've got to do content together a couple of times. I think it's the second time I've had you on the channel. We got to speak together at George's event last year, which was pretty cool. So always love to talk to you and get caught up. You have some very amazing and unique insights. We were talking offline about some of our prepping stuff, which we'll get to towards the end. But you've been studying the markets for a long time, and
pretty much my whole life on some level. Yes.
So tell us about that. Tell us about what you do right now.
Well, right now I pay great attention to the Federal Reserve and actually all central banks, but the Federal Reserve is the key, and also the IMF, because, they can say anything they want. Well, what are they doing? What are they doing? Because that's where where the truth lies. Transitory inflation. Well, inflation hasn't been transitory since 1913, so I don't know where it's suddenly going to be. Yeah. But I think they're really referring to the rate, and I think it's also interesting they're finally admitting not so transitory, though a blind monkey could have seen that.
Yeah. So this week there was at the time of this recording, there was an article from the Economist magazine, and it said that, I'll quote it, "Sharp increase in inflation over the past year has blindsided many economists. Almost no one saw it coming." What do you say about that?
Well, I think you saw it coming. I know I saw it coming. I know lots of people that actually saw it coming. But I think it's garbage, because as soon as the Fed announced that they were going to do an average of 2%, I said, here it comes. They were getting us ready. And the fact that they are allowing it to run hot for a period of time means that they're automatically behind the 8 ball. Not that I really think that raising rates anymore is going to matter in curbing inflation, but I think that's absolute. If those economists couldn't see that this was coming, then I don't think anybody should be listening to them.
Well, nobody should be listening to Paul Krugman, for example, who said the internet was going to be, whatever, passing fad, or he talked about the fax machine. And he's been wrong consistently. And he came out recently and said, hey, I was wrong. I didn't expect inflation to be this high. So I guess he's one of those economists that were blindsided.
I mean, how can you print massive amounts of money, give it away for free? It was held in the markets until this last big jolt of money, where they couldn't just give it to the banks for trading purposes. They had to then give it to the public as well, because the public would never have tolerated again what they did in 2008.
Right.
Hey, hold up just for a second. I want to tell you about something. I just got something cool in the mail I want to show you, and it is this new sleek package I just got with a brand new credit card. This isn't just any credit card. This is a BlockFi credit card that's powered by Visa, and it's backed by Bitcoin rewards. So this is a Visa card. I can use it anywhere in the world that Visa is accepted, and the benefit of this BlockFi Visa card is that I get paid back in Bitcoin. Most of my other cards pay me in some sort of reward points. I get airline miles. I'm not very good at using those. They end up accumulating and I don't do anything with them. But getting to earn Bitcoin back with every single purchase is, of course, something that matters to me. Now, I know for a lot of people, they say that the price of Bitcoin is too high. So I say, well, you can always earn Bitcoin. You can get paid in Bitcoin, or you can just get cash back rewards on every purchase. paid in Bitcoin with the BlockFi Visa credit card, used everywhere that Visa is accepted. And if you want to sign up for the Visa card that pays back in Bitcoin from BlockFi, there is a link in the description down below. Check it out.
And I just think it's really, this is so interesting. We live in the most interesting time.
Based off of your financial analysis, it seems like you kind of subscribe to the Austrian school of economics.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know. Yeah. And have so you're familiar with all that. So, it makes me think of Mises, and he talked about the crack up boom. And he said that in Austrian business cycle theory, in a normal course of economic boom, which we've had, driven by the expansion of money and credit, which we've had, the economy becomes distorted in ways that eventually lead to shortages of commodities and labor, and then increasing price inflation.
I can't even really add anything to that because It's all completely accurate. And the Austrian School of Economics it's just so much more logical and it makes sense.
Yeah.
So, it's a no-brainer for me. And having studied it my whole life, it just makes a whole lot of sense.
So they're blaming it on supply chains. That's kind of like the big thing, supply chains breaking down. But then why are supply chains breaking down? Okay, what's the order below that? So what's your take on inflation? Is it transitory? Is it not? I already know the answer to that. More importantly, kind of how are you viewing this and where do you think it's going to go?
Well, I really do hate to say this, but I do think that we have started the hyperinflationary phase. I don't see any way for them to pull it back because they can't raise the rates. They're between a rock and a hard place. What happens if they start raising interest rates into all of this debt that they have inspired corporations and businesses and the zombie corporations particularly to take on? They can't raise rates, and yet that's the way that they presumably fight inflation. And running off their balance sheet, they can't do that either. They tried both of those things back in 2016 to 2019, and it led to complete distortions and a crisis in the money market funds, which even though people didn't see it, they had to cover that up really fast. That doesn't mean that it wasn't there and that it isn't continuing to rear its ugly head. Look at the reverse repo market. Over a trillion, $1.3, $1.4 trillion a day.
Yeah. I think, I've done a lot of videos on that. I know you cover that extensively. I think just the average person, it's so complex, they just don't get it. But when it costs twice as much to fill up their car with gas, this week also, you maybe didn't see because I know you've been busy. This week, the St. Louis Fed put out an article and said, instead of turkey this year, you should have tofu turkey. Yeah, tofurkey, whatever it is. So the Fed is now giving us health advice or diet advice because of inflation.
Look, they've continuously changed the basket of the goods that they use to track inflation. Right. So if you can't afford steak, then you're going to go to hamburger. When you can't afford hamburger, you're going to go to hot dogs. And now when you can't afford hot dogs, you're going to go to tofurkey. So and then that'll make inflation look good. But I don't know what inflation is running in soybeans. Yeah. Because that's what tofu is made out of.
So let's talk about the rock and the hard place, right? So either the rock and the hard place is either one, they're basically stuck. And actually, going on from Mises, he says, as the crisis point approaches, the central bank has a choice, either to accelerate the expansion of the money supply in order or refrain from doing so at the risk of allowing massive prices to fall in disinflation. So they can either, one, continue pumping the markets full of money and keep the game going, but inflation keeps raging, or they don't to control inflation, but then everything crashes. Is that the rock and the hard place?
That is the rock and the hard place. And they're not going to stop there. They're not going to stop money printing. Look at what they did in March of 2020. It made what they did in 2008 look like chump change.
Right.
The difference is that the inflation was held inside of the stocks and the bonds and the real estate. Can they allow those to deflate? No, they can't.
Right.
And it's interesting because I get so many questions on, well, everybody's talking about deflation. Why are you talking about inflation?
Right.
Well, they're just the opposite sides of the same coin. And there's only one way to fight that deflation, and that's with inflation. I mean, that's super simple, for anybody, if that's the only way that you fight it. So yeah, that is exactly the rock and the hard place. It doesn't really matter what they do. They're wrong.
Yeah.
I like to kind of put myself in a position that what if I'm right? What if I'm wrong? And if I could put myself in a position where it does not matter either way, that's where I like to be. That's where I am with gold, and that's where I am with the collectibles, because, I can't really lose in that way. But the Fed, they're in a completely different place, because it doesn't matter what they do, they're going to lose.
Let me ask you about a third scarier option that's not rocking the hard place. Did you see Biden's nomination for the comptroller of the currency?
Oh, yes. You're right. That is scarier.
So she says, what's her name? Amarova, Samarel or something like that.
Yep.
And she's a communist from actual Russia, trained under the Lenin Scholarship Program, whatever. And she proposed to do a couple things. One, get rid of all the bank accounts and have us have direct accounts with the Fed. Mm-hmm. And then two, have the Fed actively participate in the stock market to pump prices or even short them to bring them down. And then third, inflation is too high. She can pull money out of my account and your account so we don't spend. Mm-hmm. Is that a third option?
I hope not, but when you stop and think about it, number one, didn't they open up those FedNow accounts a year ago, last October? And that was way ahead of them even having the digital dollar in place.
Right.
And that was in post.
Before they even talked about it.
There was this big promo on it, So part of me is wondering if that isn't the direction that they were going in, to begin with. So I've seen this scary piece ahead of time, and everything that I'm seeing now is making it scarier and scarier. And it really proves the point of why you need to have some wealth outside of the system that is not controlled by them.
Yeah.
And that's physical gold. They can control the spot market, what you see, and they certainly do, because a rising gold price is an indication of a failing currency. And then they'd rather you keep your money in the stock market so that they can devalue it to nothing, because stocks are still valued in terms of the fiat currency.
Yeah. I want to talk about that, about them suppressing the gold price and where that could go. But before we jump to that, just sticking on to this track for a minute. So if they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. If we continue printing, if we stop printing, things collapse. So we have to continue printing. However, if we do, prices keep going higher unless we fix the prices. So Biden said he was going to call the FTC and look into why gas prices were rising. So what if they just start fixing prices so they don't go up anymore?
Well, then what happens is producers stop producing because their costs continue to go up. And that is a tool that they use during governments and central banks use during hyperinflation. They fix rents, they fix prices, but then why in the world, if the cost is going up to for the manufacturer, for the retailer, for whoever's putting that out there, they can't stay in business. What are we going to do? Then subsidize them with more new printed money, which then devalues all the money that's out there anyway? So, that won't work.
It seems like the one thing that the Keynesian economists just can't figure out, and I guess one of the biggest differences maybe between the two, the Austrian and the Keynesian camps, is that, Keynesian, or I should say, Austrian seems to go off of more human psychology, right? Mises calls it human action. And so the Keynesians forget this. And so if my prices are fixed and I can't make a profit, then why would I continue to make that good?
Exactly. You're not going to.
Yeah, you're not going to. And so it seems that, well, it doesn't seem, history has proven that every time they've done that, it's failed. I mean, it's never worked.
Correct.
Right?
And insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Yeah. So do you think that's a possibility or a probability of them trying that?
You mean to stop printing or
no, start price fixing to control the inflation? They can't stop printing. That's their direction.
Haven't they already kind of done that with the mortgage moratoriums and the rent moratoriums, right?
Yeah.
And did that really work? I mean, it did sustain with all the money printing and the low interest rates. It did sustain real estate prices.
Yeah.
But we've also seen huge distortions in that area. So they're dipping their toe, but and the banks are trying to moderate how it comes back, how the real estate comes back on the market. But when you have a huge player in this new market like Zillow, right, having to liquidate a whole bunch of homes, but I mean, they're trying to moderate it, kind of like the substitution fund over at the IMF for the US dollar, as we lose status as the world reserve currency. They created that to convert dollars and dollar denominated assets into SDR denominated assets so that they could then regulate the speed and the quantity of dollars that flow back to the US. But it's a huge question mark if it's going to work and all that would do is moderate the speed of inflation. So if we're printing nonstop to keep all of this inflation in place, and then we have money coming back in, I don't know, you think there's a chance that somebody's going to lose control?
Yeah.
They're not gods.
Well, I think they've already lost control. It's just, can they re-grab the reins or slow it down? Going back to that IMF substitution account, fill us in a little bit more on that. I'm not super caught up on that. Obviously I know about the IMF SDR baskets, but what is this substitution account?
Well, they created the whole system to take over as the world reserve currency back in 1969. Right. And at the time, they created, that's what they call it, a substitution account. So any holders of dollars or dollar denominated bonds or loans or anything, whoever holds them can deposit them into the substitution account. Then the IMF can convert whatever they've deposited into the like products, but denominated in SDRs, and then give them back so that they can hold those dollar denominated bonds in this fund and then just send them back to the US in a regulated way. It's really kind of brilliant in many ways, because I personally, we'll see if I'm right or wrong, I don't know, but I personally think the SDR will be the new world's reserve currency. But it doesn't have a big enough market yet. So by doing the substitution, then boom, they're the biggest player on the block.
Right.
And they have converted the US dollar as the world reserve currency to the SDR as the world reserve currency. I mean, it's really genius.
Do you know if people have been doing that?
No, not yet.
Not yet. So it's open.
Tested everything. Right. They've tested everything. But to my knowledge, they haven't actually executed that yet. But it's there. Tested it. It works.
Yeah. Now, obviously, from an Austrian view, I mean, money has to have a true cost of capital. You can't print it from nothing. That distorts everything. That's not money. Right. So printing money is never going to work, right? It has to have that true cost of capital. It has to have scarcity. However, just spitballing this here, we need a neutral reserve asset, I think, right? That gold is like a neutral reserve asset. Anybody can go get it out of the ground, right? We can have that neutral reserve. The SDR is kind of like a neutral reserve asset. Because it's not a US dollar or a Chinese yuan or whatever. So it's kind of this neutral reserve. No, because what is the SDR? But it's composed of all those fiat currencies, right? It's a circular thing, right?
Well, kind of, because like the US dollar devalues its currency, and that's the largest share, an individual share of the currencies in the SDR basket. They can expand that basket to include all of them, but how is that neutral? That's even actually in many ways worse than the way that the governments currently create money, which is from debt. So in order to create an SDR, the individual currencies would have to create debt to create their currency that's then held in this basket. So the only way to fix that, and they've discussed this quite a bit actually, is to put a component of gold in the SDR, which they won't do it until confidence is required in this next currency phase.
Right.
Because as soon as they do it, then it fixes all the debt where it is, and it's not payable.
Yeah, I don't think it definitely doesn't fix anything. It just seems like maybe they could keep the charade going a little bit longer if they went to, so just like Amarova is talking about getting rid of the banks and having a direct account with the Fed. But then what about if we have a direct account with the IMF?
Which is something that they've talked about.
Right. And it's an SDR, digital dollar sort of thing. And it is more of it is more neutral a little bit. It doesn't work, but maybe it buys them a little more time.
How, first of all, let me ask you, how is it neutral?
Well, because
I just wanted to take a second to explain to you one more time just how cool having this new BlockFi Visa credit card is. I've started to move a lot of my bills over to get paid from this. Of course, all my business supplies, I'm starting to pay for this, my advertising budgets, and I'm starting to run as much as I can through it because I'm getting paid a percentage back of every single transaction in Bitcoin. We want to save in Bitcoin because Bitcoin is an asset that goes up in value because of the deflationary nature of it. And we want to spend our fiat. So I'm spending my fiat through my BlockFi Visa card, and I'm getting back Bitcoin that I can save and I can hold. I expect it to go up in value a lot. I expect to hold my Bitcoin. I'm gonna pass it to my kids and my grandkids, and hopefully my great grandkids will have my Bitcoin one day. So I'm gonna save it. I'm gonna spend my fiat through this card, and I'm gonna earn back Bitcoin that I'm gonna save. If you wanna get one, there's a link down below.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's made up of all the individual members' currencies, but each member is required to hold it to that fixed balance, right? So they can't, each member country can't control their own currency on their own, right? Because they're all making up that basket.
Boy, think about that.
No, and that's why I said it's circular. What's an SDR is made
the IMF.
The SDR is backed by dollar currency, but what's currency backed by? By the SDR. So it's like this circular thing kind of.
No, the currency is backed by debt. The SDR is backed by the currencies. Well, it's not backed by it. It's created from it. Can't actually, it's not a claim. Like the dollar is presumably a claim against the Federal Reserve. It's a Federal Reserve note, so they've loaned us those notes. And so in theory, it's a claim. But the SDR, they stated it's not a claim against anything. So in many ways, in my opinion, it's worse. But if going to the SDR did indeed fix the level of currency that any country could create, then you now have full power at an unelected level, and you have, I don't know, global control of all countries. Oy.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Does that sound good to me? Does that sound good to you?
No, it doesn't sound. No, none of this sounds good to me at all. Definitely not. I think, in my opinion, we need a separation of money and state. I don't think state should be issuing money. They shouldn't have control over money. So it's the opposite of what sounds good to me. Exactly. I'm just trying to think of how this game evolves and like how far it goes before, as you said, right, all trust is lost. I was actually just making a video before we jumped on here talking about that specifically, going back to kind of Mises's crack up boom. He said that as soon as people realize that inflation is persistent and will go on forever, then people will wake up. They won't want to hold dollars anymore. They'll be trading as fast as they can into other assets, and then the whole thing falls apart. And so I was just thinking about that trust, and I was talking about trust and how trust is very fragile. And if you're dealing with a business partner or a friend and you're starting to see things that you don't trust, and trust is being lost, but then eventually you find that piece of evidence and then boom. And then once it's gone, it's gone. There was a poll, a pretty big poll, 11,000 people were polled across 76 countries, and 41% of them said they trust Bitcoin more than their currency. That's a pretty big poll. And I was talking about how right now today we see, I think there's about 7 countries with millions of people marching in the streets.
Yes.
There's like this massive loss of trust. And so it's like the gradually and then suddenly kind of a thing. Is that how you see it happening?
Yeah. And I also, if you think back, see, a lot of people think that what we're dealing with now is a new financial crisis, but I maintain that, and I said it at the time, that the system died in 2008 and it just needed to go on life support system till they could figure out this next piece because they weren't really quite ready for it.
Right. So
what we're dealing with now is simply an extension of the crisis that happened in 2008. A lot of confidence and a lot of trust has been lost. And that's why they always look at inflation expectations. They don't care what really inflation is. They care how you feel about it, because that does color what you do. And I can tell you from personal experience, it definitely colors what I do. I don't hold a lot of dollars. I'm running a business, so there's a certain level that I have to keep, but I'm prepared for that to totally go away, to lose 100% of its value, and it wouldn't impact me at all. And when I get dollars, I convert them into something that has a lot more value to me.
I think I think people realize this without realizing it. And so I better buy a house today because it's going to be too expensive in the future. I better buy a used car today because it's going to be too expensive. I better buy more canned goods today because I might not be able to get them in the future. And so I think people realize it, but don't really realize what's happening.
Yeah.
Think that's the case?
I totally think that's a case, because and I mean, this has been, I guess, my battle. I don't really want to call it a battle, but I do feel like I'm a warrior. So I think, I mean, I think that this has been the case forever. I mean, there was a time when, honestly, my whole family thought that I was completely out of my mind. And my mom used to ask me all the time, well, but Lynn, don't you think Greenspan's smarter than you? Don't you think he's smarter than you? So, well, I really hope he's smarter than me, because he certainly had a whole lot more influence than me. But if he believes the garbage that's coming out of his mouth, then no, I don't think he's smarter than me.
Right.
But those same people that thought I was Looney Tunes are now changing their mind, and some have absolutely changed their minds because they see what's happening. So for me, what I try and get people to do, and I think you do this too, is to look at things just a teeny weeny bit differently instead of this massive paradigm shift, which is so hard for people to do. Then just look at it just a little differently, because when you do, it's amazing what you see.
Yeah.
And I know you talk about patterns all the time. Me too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something to think about that way. Like I said, we're seeing it, but you just have to kind of look at it. It's that paradigm shift.
It is. It's hard.
Yeah. Jumping gears.
Yeah.
Or go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, what we're really asking people to do, and what they really need to do at this point, is accept the fact that they've been lied to their entire lives.
Nobody wants that.
Nobody wants to do that. But ignorance doesn't make you immune. It just leaves you vulnerable.
Yeah. I like to say that the ostrich can bury its head in the sand, but it won't keep it from getting eaten.
Exactly. That's perfect.
Yeah, you can choose to ignore it. So jumping gears, let's talk about gold for a minute, because you talked about the price of gold and the manipulation that's probably being done. I mean, it seems pretty manipulated to me, not just in the paper markets, but even the way the price is set by the LBMA in the morning, et cetera. But it seems like that they have to allow gold to come up some, otherwise it would have been stuck at $35 an ounce, right? They have to allow it to come up some. The gold miners need to be able to make more revenue, or they're going to go out of business. What do you think about the manipulation and them suppressing the price? Is it as apparent as people think it is, or is it worse?
Well, it's worse because it's been going on for like ever.
Yeah.
But you are absolutely accurate in that gold miners have to make a profit, or they're not going to mine gold, and there is a finite amount of it yet left, in the ground, and that is a key monetary tool. As the Bank for International Settlements says, it is the only financial asset, the only one that runs zero counterparty risk. So it's and it's used across the entire global economy. So it's quite necessary and an important asset. But since it is a key monetary asset, if it goes up, then people notice. Like, forgive me on this, because I don't really like to talk about this topic too often on air.
Okay.
But you're talking about Bitcoin, right? And I know that it's billed as being rare, but it's still inside of the system because it has to go through computer screens. So what happens if we have a blackout, right? And it hasn't really been tested yet. That's where we're going. I know for sure we're going digital, but it's still, it seems to me, and you're a lot more knowledgeable on it than I am, but it seems to me that it's being used to get people used to digital currencies, programmable currencies, because the CBDCs that they have in mind for us are completely programmable money.
Sure.
So you have gold on the one hand that held your privacy. And if you weren't happy with what the governments were doing, you'd go in and convert your dollars for gold.
Right.
Then we went to dollars. You still had privacy in cash, but we've been trained away from cash. And banks don't like it when you take it out and you deposit it in, but it's not illegal at this point.
Right.
And now we they could control staying on the fiat for a second. They could control it by raising or lowering interest rates, whether they wanted to speed up inflation or slow it down.
Right.
But it still took 18 months going through the system before they knew if what they wanted worked. Now we're going to CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, where that's programmable money. So when you're talking about Amoroso, right, and her desire, well, we just take it from them. Okay, that's pretty darn easy to do if everything you have is in the system. India just announced, now we'll have to see how this works, but didn't they just announce this morning, I saw on Bloomberg, that they were going to outlaw any private cryptocurrencies?
What the paper said is that they're considering barring people from trading it or using it, but they could still own it as an asset.
Okay.
So they could still, hold it somehow through a custodian, I guess. They didn't say, but I'm guessing they may be able to give them some sort of an ETF price exposure, but they can't actually have it or use it.
Isn't that interesting? So you look at what's happening with China. I mean, this is a battle royale, and it's a very interesting one, and we'll just see how it plays out.
Yeah. Well, it is a battle. I believe that the world, well, I don't believe, this is apparent. The whole world's trending towards authoritarianism, obviously. We're more and more centralization. And so when I look at this, and then of course, unfortunately, the technology is giving them the tools to kind of create this like permanent enslavement. And as you said, I've kind of done a lot of work on these cycles. And so as far back as you go through history, it's the same process of revolution, freedom, oppression, revolution, freedom. And I think that cycle could almost be broken here because either one, we have the technology to maybe create like this permanent enslavement, which is super scary, or maybe it breaks. But back to kind of the point you're making with China and India. There's a third piece and then you have the US that's staying a little bit more neutral, kind of allowing technology to kind of flourish. But then this week, El Salvador has now thrown their hat in the ring to be the Gulch of the world. And basically they've removed all restrictions. So no cerveza sickness, as our buddy George calls it, no restrictions and mandates in regards to that, but also opening up all economic activity for investment, cap gains, none of that. And then they even launched a new bond, a Bitcoin-backed bond.
Right.
And so I think it will see game theory playing out. It's fascinating.
It's fascinating. It is.
Sometimes as scary as it is right now, sometimes I think back at how amazing it is that we're witnessing this in real time, because history books are going to be written about this.
Oh, 100%. I mean, we are in the fourth revolution, no doubt about it. And honestly, I'm a lot older than you, but I know that I've been groomed for this moment in time. So, I'm a warrior and I'm, prepared, but I'm watching all of this and it's just fascinating.
Yeah. While we're talking about that, so, there's the Mundell-Fleming trilemma is that a nation can't control their interest rates, the money supply, and capital inflows and outflows at the same time. They have to kind of give one up to get more of the other. And so since they want to manage the interest rates and the money supply, then capital will outflow. And so then nations like China create these capital control laws. I saw one of your recent videos, you were talking about financial repression.
Yes.
And I did this video. I'm gonna pull this up on the screen here, and this is a IMF paper from 2015.
Yep.
The liquidation of government debt. Have you seen this one before?
I have. I love IMF working papers.
And they said that the public debt often produces a drama of difficult default and restructuring. So too much debt, they have to default or restructure. But the debt's reduced through financial repression. That was what you were talking about.
Yep.
And it's a tax on bondholders and savers. And so they say that inflation is a tax on savers, but then through negative yielding bonds, they're also repressing bondholders. Is that what you got from this?
It's been a while since I've read that particular article, but financial repression is about controlling the flow of funds into it. What it does is it really keeps the government in control of it. And it's another way of stealing your wealth invisibly. Yeah. I mean, and that's what this whole thing is about. That's what inflation is about. It's a whole system that's created to get you to volunteer your wealth without realizing that you're doing it. And they've been using financial repression consistently, openly, another IMF working paper since, I believe, 1948, and they just show how it overlaps. Once they put this piece in play, before it ends, they've started the next piece of financial repression so we've been in constant financial repression. I believe the date was 1948. I could be wrong. I don't have it right in front of me.
I just had always thought about inflation, right? Like, so inflation is theft, right? They're stealing your purchasing power. I hadn't really thought about it like this, though, where it says like capital controls and regulatory restrictions created a captive audience for government debt, limiting tax base erosion. It says financial repression is most successful in liquidating debt when accompanied by inflation. So it seems like, the inflation part seems obvious, right? But since the 1970s and the Vanguard funds, we've had this 60-40 bond split. And through negative yielding bonds, they're literally stealing your wealth through bonds and inflation. So savers and investors. And then they put all the pensions into the bonds and they're stealing from them.
Exactly. Exactly. It is a way for them to have you move into the direction that they want you to move in, perception management. And you're absolutely volunteering your wealth and you don't realize it. And on top of that, they set up, schemes like they created IRAs in the 1970s, right?
Right.
And they knew when they created it that people would look at that account and think that whole account is theirs, right? So, hey, I have $100,000 in there or whatever you have in there. Yeah. And, I don't want to pay taxes. So you leave it in there, which enables them to utilize the financial repression even more. But you never get away from paying taxes. You have to really be strategic in how do I want to pay those taxes, right?
Right.
Because that's what the government does, the IRS does, they know based upon your age and how much you have in there, how much tax they can generate from you. And this is a big piece about the electronic currencies.
Yeah.
And if you read, I know you read those papers too. So what do they talk about? They talk about lifetime taxes, right? Yeah. So it's all a big scheme. I think people really need to take a look at it and determine how and when they want to pay those taxes, right? Because they're not going down. That's the way the government, that's one of the ways that the government funds their spending is through taxation. And even if you hold something like, gold or silver or any other asset inside of there, gold and silver being suppressed for so long, it's kind of like a spring. You hold your hand on a spring, and when you remove that hand, the spring is going to shoot in a direction.
Right.
It isn't Wall Street that's going to determine that shooting. It's the central banks and the government when they reset the currency after all confidence is lost. And I think that that's what has really sped up, because that confidence, that's been going downhill for a really long time. And the cerveza virus was used to suppress the people that were fighting back. But now, as you mentioned earlier, it's rearing its ugly head again. So what are they going to use to suppress it? But financial repression, been in the cards for a long time with inflation, really helps them liquidate those debts, except they never really do liquidate the debts, do they? They just grow more and more and more and more and more and more and more.
Yeah. And with leverage. So then each one just gets worse and worse and worse.
I can't even imagine the size of the derivative market since they have changed all of the accounting for it with the netting and with the thising and thatting, and so much and the leverage is that's really going to be what overwhelms the central banks, is that leverage that they've used when the traders actually take full control of the markets. They are definitely in control of the markets. You could even see it since 2008, how that shifted.
Yeah. We have just a few more minutes left. I want to just switch gears a little bit. Something I'd love to talk to you about, we were talking about pre-recording, is just a little bit of preparing for this. And so as they continue to print more money, the markets continue to get more distorted, more supply chains break down. It makes things get harder and harder to get, et cetera. And then you talk about kind of this almost end game where all confidence is lost out of the currency, and then they have to kind of reset this whole system. I hate trying to give timeframes on anything. So if you want to, maybe tell us what timeframes that you think this happens over, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. But more importantly, what are you thinking as far as like being prepared for?
Well, I have my mantra, and I've been personally executing that for a very long time. So when you come to Phoenix the next time, come, I'll show you.
Yeah.
But it's food, water, energy security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. Because these are the things that we need, no matter what's happening with the economy, to have a reasonable standard of living. So, and food becomes the single biggest issue for most people. And I mean, you can look around the world at the countries that are going through it right now and look at how much the food prices have gone up. Like you indicated in the beginning, make a tofurkey because it's cheaper than a turkey, and so, I think that's what we need to do. When I looked at the mantra when the cerveza thing hit in March of 2020, and I was fine because I had everything because I've been working on it for so long, except for a bug out location. And I am dead in the center of Phoenix. I know you have more choices, but I don't. My choices are limited because of my family, because they need me. So I can't go anywhere.
Right.
But I did find a very remote location, and that has all of those things except for the food, although I could hunt.
Yeah. Do you think as this, the money printing continues and it continues to distort more markets, that supply chains break down to a point where we have shortage of food?
Absolutely. And I think we're going we're going to go very, very local for a while, which means you have to have the ability to barter. And as everybody now knows, even though I've said it for years, but toilet paper is a good tool of barter, right? I mean, I know it sounds funny, but somehow when we go through these crises, that's one of the things that comes up all the time. But yeah, I do think that we're already seeing the level of hunger and people going to bed hungry at night and look at Venezuela.
Right.
You had middle-class people that are dumpster diving for whatever they can get because 90% of the population is in abject poverty. And, it's interesting because over the years, we have been trained, away from being self-sufficient and being dependent upon the system. I mean, I bought organic before it was a normal thing to buy organic. And I can tell you that those apples looked like you picked them from a tree and they'd have blemishes on them and, they'd be different sizes and all of that. But today, when you go into the grocery store, they're perfect.
Right.
The peppers are perfect. Well, I have gardens. I can tell you, it doesn't look like that in the gardens, though the taste is far, far, far superior. But, we have the illusion of choice. We do not have real choice because all of these, whether you're looking at the food or seeds, which is part of the food chain, they're owned by like 6 big pharma companies.
Right.
Pharma's like taking over everything. They are the biggest lobbyists.
Yeah. To your point, about the United States not really being self-sustaining. And I think when I go and look at, nations like Venezuela, as you mentioned, right, we've been watching them kind of fall into this or devolve, whatever you want to call it, over the last, decade, 2 decades, really. And as Argentina is going through it and all these nations are going through it, but they're more agrarian based. Right. They're a little bit more used to living off the land. So to your point, some people are, dumpster diving, but with enough money, like they're still getting by, there's still food and supplies. But in the US, like 85% of the meat comes from 4 companies. And if the fruit or whatever, as you said, right. And so if like supply chains break down to a point, it could be more severe here than other countries because we're just not set up for that. We're not local based.
I agree with you. And in fact, I was just on with I had Arpad, who was from Romania.
Okay.
And he actually lived through a hyperinflationary event. His father and grandfather lived through 2 hyperinflationary events. And to your point, you're absolutely right. What they did was they left the cities and they went back to their family farms and they worked the farms and they came together in community. So his family grew potatoes, but another family member worked on cars. Another family member did this and they came together. So in the US, we don't really have that kind of system. Same thing happened when Greece was going through, and they still are, but when Greece was going through the sovereign debt crisis,
right?
People moved out of the cities, went back to the country. What are we going to do?
Well, I know what you and I are going to do. Everyone else better make some plans. I recently also got a piece of land, not even in my home state. So if I have to go there, I'll be traveling a distance to get there. But just so I could have that, not only have the land and the room and the food, but also the people around me. Because I'm in Puerto Rico right now. My home is in California, and neither one of those would probably be the best places to be if things really break down. So I'm in another location where I think, the people, that's a big piece of it. You talk about that community.
Huge. Community is probably the single most important part of this, because it's like for me on my bug out location, I'm really planning on 35 people. 35 people, not that I have to do all the work, but it takes a village so that we've got growers, we've got hunters, we've got builders, we've got mechanics, so that you have a variety of skill sets that can come together and get through this. I hope it never gets to that point because I like the privacy out there. It's very, very remote and it's so quiet and so wonderful. but I've got to be realistic about the possibility that I see happening. I hope it never gets to that point. But
yeah, I said, I give it a very low probability of getting to that point. But if it does, and I'm not prepared, I'm not okay for that. I'm not okay with that. And that's kind of a point you were making earlier. Like if you're wrong, you're okay either way. And so I look at it like that, like what's the worst that can happen? If it's a small probability, but if that happened, like there's a small probability my house will catch on fire. But if it does happen and I don't have insurance, I'm not okay with that. And so that's the way I kind of looked at it. And I was like, it has a small probability. I'm not saying that it's going to happen for sure, small probability, but I'm not okay if it happens, and I'm not prepared. And so I'll just be prepared. So
that's it. What if I'm right? What if I'm wrong? You want to be in a position where it really does not matter. Yeah. If I'm wrong, guess what? I've got a great family vacation location.
Yep, exactly. So with that, we're over time. We're going to go ahead and shut it down. I know, Lynette, you're with ITM Trading, and so we'll have a link to that. Obviously, you have amazing analysis on your YouTube channel. We're going to link to that. Is there anything else specifically you'd like to draw attention to while we have you?
Well, we're just, we're talking about community, and this is the time of year where we're getting into it. And so I think, everybody needs to do what they can to build that link with the community. It may even be, taking over, if you've made some cookies or something, taking some cookies to a neighbor, or if you can help, like I do a lot of work with CFLA, which is a local school for kids that are extremely disadvantaged, and, everything in between. I would say really community. It's why I do these interviews, to be honest with you, because we're all part of the community and we're all working for the same cause. We may have different opinions about different things, but that's okay. That's what makes it interesting. So, and definitely you want to buy gold, physical gold and silver, not through ETFs, not, if you don't hold it, you don't own it.
Yeah.
So, definitely outside of the system, not dependent upon anybody else, be as independent and self-sufficient as possible.
All right. That's awesome, Lynette. I appreciate it. Always a pleasure talking to you, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
All
Good
right,
seeing
bye.
you too, Mark. Bye.